Warm welcome to each one of you present here. Today we gather here to celebrate the beauty and power of literature, an art form that has incredible ability to transport us to different worlds, expand our horizons and ignite our imaginations. I, Mansi Malik, a Ehsas woman of Hyderabad, welcome you to the Right Circle, a cross-country forum for wordsmith in English language and literature. Right Circle strives to bring together authors and passionate readers to form a community of its own. It's an honor to have all of you join us for yet another session of the Right Circle. Today's event is in collaboration with venue and hospitality partner Trident Hotel and support of Ehsas Women of Hyderabad. This event is under the patronage of Sri Cements Limited as their CSR activity. We are particularly privileged to have Ms. Shobha Tharoor Srinivasan grace the occasion with her presence and give us the opportunity to listen to her in close quarters as she wades through her experiences and reflections with today's moderator, Ms. Anjum Babu Khan, my fellow Ehsas woman of Hyderabad. Before the captivating rendezvous unrolls, let me take a few seconds to introduce you to Prabha Khaitan Foundation. Prabha Khaitan Foundation is a non-profitable trust based in Kolkata. This was founded by an eminent literature and cultural activist, Dr. Prabha Khaitan, in early 1980s. The foundation is dedicated to socio-cultural and humanitarian causes. It is also committed to promoting performing arts, culture, education, literature, gender equality, and women's empowerment through authors' meet, book launches, literature fests for veteran and child authors, panel discussions, boutique festivals, and performances of singers, dancers, and theatre performers. Authors and artists connect with their niche audience through events under the auspice of its varied initiatives. We are overjoyed to share that 3-time Grammy Award winner Ricky Cage, the man behind signature caller tune of Prabha Khaitan Foundation, has curated 12 amazing musical pieces to score across video invites of events and social media platforms. The song for the month of January is dedicated to the theme Himalayas. Himalayas by stalwart Copeland and Ricky Cage is a tribute to mighty mountain range. Himalayas is the mightiest mountain range in this planet and has third highest supply of fresh water after North and South Pole. Every living being on this planet is sustained directly or indirectly by these mountains. Now it is my utmost privilege to introduce Ms. Shobha Tharoor Srinivasan. Shobha Tharoor Srinivasan is an award-winning children's author, poet, voice-over talent who won 68th National Film Awards in India for Best Narration Voiceover for the film Rhapsody of Rains, Monsoon of Kerala in 2022. Shobha ji has recorded voice work for documentaries, educational programs, journalistic initiatives, and audiobooks. And her distinct mellifluous voice embellishes her own narratives as well. Shobha ji has published children's books in India and United States, and the books have been accepted in school text and are part of school curriculum in India. Shobha ji is a regular speaker on panels and a frequent guest at literary festivals. She has been featured on radio and TV, profiled in magazines, and one of her stories was dramatically performed by Silicon Valley Shakespeare, California. Shobha's word of love of words and stories began in childhood with storytelling sessions and wordplay with her siblings. When she is not traveling in search of stories, Shobha ji lives in Campbell, California with her husband. And in today's conversation, we keenly wait to get many takeaways from you. Our moderator for the evening is my dear friend, Ms. Anjum Babu Khan, a Ehsas woman of Hyderabad. Besides being a successful professional, she is an eager literature enthusiast. Without much delay, over to you, Anjum. But before that, I request everybody to switch off your phones or put them on the silent mode. Thank you.
Prabha Khaitan Foundation's Right Circle. Today, it's a wonderful opportunity for us to have a nice conversation with Mrs. Shobha Tharoor Srinivasan. And she is a person who wears many hats, that of an author, speaker, national award-winning voice-over artist, an advocate for equal rights, and, of course, a global citizen of our shared world. Welcome to Hyderabad. It's such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
So today is going to be a session where we are going to be able to talk about your multi-dimensional world and get to know you a little bit about get to know you as an author and all the different hats that you wear. Shobhaji, we are looking forward to having some interesting dialogues and discussions with you. But let's start with something simple. Let's start from the beginning. Let's start from childhood and sweet memories of childhood and your family bonding experiences. How was your childhood? And can you share with the audience some sweet old memories from that time?
Absolutely. First of all, I want to say thank you so very much, Hyderabad, for inviting me, SAS, as well as Right Circle, Prabha Kaithan Foundation. They're a great foundation. They really believe in spreading the word of literature, in encouraging readership, in taking books across the country. And I've been grateful that I have actually traveled with this book and others across the country for them as well. It's lovely to be here. I had a very warm welcome this morning when I flew in from cold Delhi. We had a very, very, actually, as I said, a very sweet and warm welcome. I was telling Neena ji that I usually get sent a car, but in this instance, there was a warm face behind as well, and she picked me up and brought me, so I was very grateful. Good to see all of you. It's interesting. The Right Circle very often invites men as well. I notice we have an all-female audience here, which has its own charms, right? We can say we hold up half the sky after all, so why not? My childhood. I grew up like some of you here, and perhaps like many of you, at a time when there wasn't very much to watch on television other than the Kisan programs. We were not distracted by video games or devices like children are today. So I grew up in a family where, as I was explaining to the gentleman I had met who was in the car with us, who works for a newspaper, that we grew up at a time where books and words and word games were what kept us going. And so that was my childhood. And my father worked for a newspaper, so we had 5 to 6 newspapers every day in the house. And as we grew older, we read them, or at least we read the sections in the papers that interested us. But the habit of reading was very much part of our lives. And reading books, picking up books from the library, finishing them and taking them back to the library and getting a new set was probably the most exciting thing to do. And as siblings, we played a lot of word games. You know, like the Wordle game today that everybody's doing on New York Times. I'm telling you, I think my father started and invented that, because he used to ask us these words where we had a combination of 5 letters to come up with to make a word, and we'd play it. You know, I remember
Somehow
that from my
I'm not
childhood.
surprised with your exemplary
We played
vocabulary that
Scrabble.
both of you have, you and your
you.
brother.
So yes, I had a lovely childhood, a carefree childhood, and I'm the middle born, so in many ways it's a little bit easier, because the eldest child has to fulfill the parents' dreams, and my brother took care of that aspect of it. So the disadvantage, of course, is that they let you do what you want and you're not pushed as much. But the advantage is that you don't cause the same stresses, I guess.
Wonderful, thank you. I don't know if the audience would know, but we have Shobhaji, who was the first ever Amul baby. Yes. Oh, that's a surprise for a lot of you. So before we get into your writing journey and the other hats that you're wearing, we would love to know how you, as a 10-month-old baby, stole the spotlight as the first ever Amul baby. And you would not remember, but I'm sure your
But I've heard
family...
it's part of the family folklore now.
So what has your family said about those, moments of fame that you had so early on?
What's exciting about that story, which I only discovered much, much later, is that guess who the photographer was of that project? Shyam Benegal. Isn't that incredible? Well, it shows how old I am, I guess. But those days, he was not a famous director. He worked for an ad agency, and he used to do the photo shoots for the models. And it is true that they went across the country. They were going to launch the baby powder. What in America is called formula, what babies take if they're not breastfeeding. So it was baby powder, and they were looking for a face to launch it. And they evidently took 712 photographs all over the country. They were looking for a particular look, nothing to do with anything else, but they just didn't find the right person. And then my father this was in Bombay. I was born in Bombay. And my father worked, as I told you, in the newspaper world. But he was very much what we call in these days sort of social service or cultural enhancement. He was always interested in sort of creating synergy between groups. When he went to Calcutta, he formed the Bengal Kerala Society. And in Bombay, he was one of the first to start the advertising club of Bombay. And he was with the other well-known advertising names like Bobby Sister and, Sister's advertising agency, for those of you who might remember. But these were all luminaries in that field at that time. So we had started it, and it was the Sisters agency doing the campaign, and they came and asked, didn't you just have a baby? Can we have a look at your kids? And that's exactly how it happened. So they said, well, let's just photograph her, and it worked out, and I was the first Amul baby. It was a black and white campaign. It was a black and white campaign. But the next year, my sister and I are less than 21 months apart. When they did the next round of Amul babies in color, it was my sister who was so she was the second baby. I think they decided, well, these Tharoor girls can do it. That's it. Yeah.
How nice. And then what does your family say about that time? Did people know you as a Amul baby?
No, people knew me as other things, but not as the Amul baby. I was Juliet, Romeo and Juliet in Calcutta, and I've done all kinds of things in Cal. Amul baby was a very old story. The reason it's come back as part of the sort of national zeitgeist is because Amul celebrated was it 50th anniversary, was it? I don't remember, something like that, or 60th, or they had a big anniversary, and there was a lot of splash about it in the papers. And because of the story that was mentioned, I guess, my brother wrote a piece about it, and that's how everyone discovered, except he got all the dates wrong and all that. He doesn't remember, but it doesn't matter. So I teased him about that. I said, no, you've made me 2 years older than I am, but anyway, which matters to me. But the story is now very much asked of me wherever I go. The little other piece of the Shyam Benegal story is that Shyam Benegal came to Berkeley to do a retrospective of his films. I mean, we're talking about much, much later, when I was an adult, I had children, all of that. But this is my mother, just to show you what an incredible force she is. I told her I'm going to see Shyam Benegal's movie at a festival. And she said, oh, go and say hi to Shyam. And I said, I'm not going to do that. There'll be thousands of people there, and you'll have to stand in line. And that just wasn't the kind of thing I do. And she said, but you have to. You were his Amul baby. So that's how I found out about it. And I went to see him by standing in line because I knew my mother would ask. And what was so exciting is I said, hello, Mr. Benegal, I'm your Amul baby. And he didn't remember my name, but he remembered my father's name. And he was so excited. It was really an incredible experience as an adult to be sort of embraced by this incredible director. And he dragged me to meet his wife and said, look, I forgot his wife's name, but he said, this is Chandran's daughter. She was our first Amul baby, etc., etc. So it's a lovely story. It's a story that I can say when I'm an old lady to my grandchildren and others.
How nice, how nice. Well, we all know that the Tharoors are known for their wit and wisdom and extraordinary vocabulary, right? Both you and Dr. Shashi Tharoor, and you both exemplify that.
That's very kind of you to say.
From that cute baby on the Amul billboards to an award-winning children's author and voiceover artist, we really salute you and your accomplishments.
Thank you.
But we want to know how did you go from that Amul baby to that of a writer? So let's explore that, your journey as a writer, and where was your first source of inspiration to write?
Well, as I told you, we grew up in a household of words, and whenever I go to schools and when I talk to parents, they always say, our kids are not reading, there's so many competing instincts. And I say, well, once you've embraced a good book, it's impossible. I cannot believe your children wouldn't want to read. The idea is, how many books do you have at home? Do you read at home? Are the parents reading? All of those things matter. And secondly, are you forcing your children to read what you want them to read? Or are you allowing them to pick up a comic book or a graphic novel or whatever it is they're interested in at this point? If we do that, then the whole whole idea of reading comes into play. But that wasn't your question. How did I go from being, well, one of the advantages in India, we're very fortunate. If you grew up in an urban world, we were not moneyed people in that sense, but we traveled with books in our heads. And my father worked for the newspaper. He went as a young man to England himself. So we were exposed to a lot of interesting things, and we grew up in Bombay and Calcutta. We had, my brother was writing and publishing at a very young age, so the idea of reading, writing, becoming a writer was sort of part of the family lore and part of the family DNA. I was very fortunate that as a child, I wrote some story about rabbits, which was very similar to probably an Enid Blyton or a Beatrix Potter or something, and my father thought it was a well-composed story with the right narrative end and all of that, and he sent it off without telling me to, those Sunday junior sections, Hindustan Times or Hindu, and they published it. And he called me one week and said, see this? And my name was there. And it's so exciting when you have a byline in the paper. Those are incentives. But in many ways, I think it's the sound of words that I've always loved. And I wrote poetry when I was a child. I've done voiceovers. I coached my kids when they were in school. They were stars in the field. It's only when they left home. This is all in my older years that I'm doing the voiceover work and writing for children. I wrote throughout my life, even in my career. I was a development director for an organization that served people with disabilities. And my task was essentially technical writing. I wrote grants to build resources for the organization. I wrote college, interviews in college for the college paper. So, writing, reading, and it's part of your DNA. It's there in every part of your work. So writing is, it happens. And in this book, my mother's pride and excitement was that her father used to get the Reader's Digest and the National Geographic subscriptions in the little village of Collingwood, which now, by the way, I think Anand Mahindra or someone went there and tweeted about it, and so everyone's talking about Collingwood. But Collingwood is Hyderabad. It's where my mother was born, and it's a small village in the town of Palakkad, in the district of Palakkad in Kerala. A very beautiful place, and I've described it in this as well. He used to get these magazines. He spoke English. He was a history and geography teacher, and so people, when they wanted letters written in English, would come to him, to my mother's father, to get those letters written. He was like the village scribe. So, when we have an interest in learning and education and books, I think all kinds of avenues open up to us.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think you answered my next question, which was what made the Tharoors such great writers, but I think you gave a whole expansive, glimpse into that. You were born clearly in a literary family. Now, children's literature, moving on to that, that has a charm of its own. And I wanted to ask you that when you're writing for children, the words convey a different emotion, right? But adults can also resonate with that. And what opted you to become a children's author?
That's a very good question. My own kids ask me that. They said, Mom, you're such an unlikely children's author. I said, why? That's so unfair, And they said, well, you don't sit and read children's books. You're always reading, political stuff and other things. And I said, but I love children's. And now, I'm a grandmother now. My daughter has 2 children. And I read to them and we make up stories and we do things. So it's sort of natural. Why
Did you
children's
start
literature?
after you became a grandmother or before that?
Before that. I used to read to my children before they could read. We really believed in reading, and I really think it's an incredible experience. I know other people are doing that. I don't want to sort of sound like I have the wisdom of that, but it is true that you can read to children before they know how to read, and the sound of words is what they pick up first, and then the words become familiar. Then the book covers and the pictures become familiar. Then they go out and pick up books. You will not believe it. Here I hear from people nobody wants to read. My little grandson is begging us, can you read me 5 stories rather than 2? So people want to be entertained by books. They really do. Children do. It's the natural instinct. It's other things that take it away from them. So you asked something else about that?
So why children's literature?
books?
And also, one more question to follow up to that is, writing children's literature, is that more difficult, or how is that different from writing for adults?
So they both excellent questions. I mean, why children's literature? Well, I started out because I was already sort of making up stories for kids in many ways when I was doing it with my children, and I thought, let me give it a shot. And I was writing a lot of poetry. I've done some children's books written in rhyme as well. And so it came from that, because I already had written things and put in the drawer, never thought about publishing, and then had to fine-tune all of that. So I had been writing over the years, you know, and it came up that way. Is it a difficult task? You know, it's so sad today when you write children's books. I've had people come to me, and I'm not the only one, other children's writers, and they'll say, oh, your books are so good. You should write a novel, or you should write something for adults. And then we think, so obviously they don't think writing children's books is good enough. The reality is it's a particularly difficult and interesting task. First of all, you have to take that responsibility seriously, because I do anyway. What children read today is what's going to inform them later as adults. And I think unless we put the right ideas out there, we're having people who are going to be stewards of the planet, who are going to be leaders of the future world, who may have ideas that you certainly don't want them to have. So, you know, I think if you take what you're doing seriously and you entertain as well as inform and educate in some ways when you write, you're doing your work for others as well. And I think I do take that job seriously. Is it difficult to do? I have to confess that if I was publishing, I've had a really wonderful run of children's books in India, and I've been very lucky that I won awards, and the books have been resonating. I've been invited to schools. I'm traveling all over the country talking about them. I have to confess, though, that in America, things would have been a little bit stricter. So, for instance, I have an exquisite book, not because I've written it, but it's just exquisitely produced book by HarperCollins that I wrote called Parvati the Elephant's Very Important Day. And it is what is called a picture book. Now, what is a picture book? Anywhere in the world, a picture book is a book that has to have illustrations that can be followed by a non-reader so that you can get the story by looking at the pictures as well as with the words. That's one thing. That's one technical aspect of a picture book. The other aspect is it can be no more than 1,000 words, and most often about 500 to 800 words. So it has to be a short book. Can't be longer than 32 pages. In addition, there are particular, in America, some of the children's publishers who publish children's books are very particular about the fact that this is for early readers or non-readers, and so you can only use very limited vocabulary. I was very fortunate that I wrote this in rhyme, which is a little bit harder. It's an adventure story of an elephant set in Kerala, and I pitched it to HarperCollins that loved it and wanted to publish it, but they didn't say to me, change all your language. So I didn't have to do that. And I have in that book 10 Malayalam words from Kerala, because the elephant is set in Kerala. I have a glossary that tells you what those words mean. And the reason is because I truly believe I want to be the kind of children's writer whose books will endure at every age. And I think all of us who write should feel that way. You don't just read to a child. It's not like reading a novel. You know, okay, maybe some people have gone and read Love Story by Eric Segal many times, but most of us have read it, we know the story, we've put it away. That's not how a children's book should be, at least from my perspective. It's a book you read to, the child then likes it. When they don't know how to read, there are some pages of pictures maybe that interest them. They come back to it later. Later in life, they read it themselves. Later still, they look up the meaning of words. Later on, they want to know more about, the fact that, elephants are getting extinct all over the world, or that there is cruel practices in temples in South India and elsewhere, that there are other stories. So you investigate further and further and further from the story. So I do think that if you take it seriously, which most of us do, and there's some wonderful children's authors, especially in India, that I've encountered, it's not an easy job.
Wow, that's wonderful. Well, we know that the art of storytelling has great value, right? And it also bridges a lot of gaps. It also creates a lot of human connection, or conveys certain values, as you were mentioning earlier. And if you can share a little bit about your thoughts on the value of storytelling and how it's important to introduce this storytelling to children and just the world. I think you've talked about introducing them to books and reading and all, but just the value of storytelling
Well,
particularly.
As I tell kids in school, as well as when we go out and talk about even my mother's book, all of us are storytellers. And, for those who didn't know Lily, this book resonates because so many people, I went to Missouri, and so many men and women came to me after reading the book and said that they had so many familiar stories, that either it was a dadi or a mother or a aunt or a sister or somebody whose stories, and these are stories of diasporic. This is a story of a Malayali lady who grew up in a village and then went off to England and then continued to live in other parts of India. Those are stories that are familiar to a lot of people. It's a woman who, and all women, so many women. I mean, my mother asked me, why did you write a book about me? And I said, why not? And she said, why didn't you write about your father or your brother? Or I haven't invented anything, is what she said. Is because she didn't think that her value to us was as important.
She invented 3 global citizens.
She invented 3 global citizens, yes. And she inspired us on a daily basis on so many different ways. And at a time when in your 50s, she was widowed in her 50s, at a time when very often in India, women are supposed to sort of retire into the night and go live with their son or stay on their own. I don't mean everybody's doing that, but very often in my mother's generation, that's what happened for a woman who was born and brought up in Kerala. She actually did so much after that stage of life that she's continued to inspire us in so many different ways. I know I'm digressing, but you said we are all storytellers, and that was the purpose. Storytelling is a way to make connection. You said it yourself. When during the pandemic, children were not playing games, as a sort of volunteer thing, I did a voiceover. I wrote short versions of Panchatantra stories and Aesop's fables, Jataka tales, Tenali Raman, that some of you may be familiar with, and I would sort of just read it, just dramatically read it, but I was on video, and I don't usually do video when I'm doing voiceovers, it's all audio, but I did it for kids, and I just have to, even if I was in my pajamas, I was logging in at night when it was morning for children, they were all at home. My YouTube channel, which I still don't manage to maintain because it's just one more thing to do and it's too much to do. But at that time, it went from, I had nobody because I hadn't started a channel to, several thousand of kids who were logging in every day to listen. So listening to stories, telling stories, sharing stories are all different ways of making connections. And that's essentially what the power of the narrative is.
Wonderful. So now we're going to look at your other hat that you wore. So writer and voiceover artist. I mean, kudos for straddling both worlds so well and with equal confidence. But what inspired you to become a voiceover artist?
Actually, I used to do elocution in school. Rajini might remember that. And in economics class, we had teachers. I mean, a teacher would tell me to read aloud the book. We did not have a very good economics teacher because none of us really learnt anything. But when we used to come into class, they'd say, Shobha will now read from chapter 1, da-da-da-da-da. So I sort of grew up with that confidence that I was quite good at reading anyway, aloud, that I knew when to stop, when to change my sentences, when to break, take pauses, etc., etc. And then I was doing these contest debates and elocution in school and winning tournaments. So I loved the idea of using my voice to do things. I was in theatre, like a lot of children growing up in Cal in those days. I got good parts. When I auditioned, I got the part, usually the main roles, I loved it. So, I knew that I could use my voice in different ways. Voiceover work is something you can do in your pajamas forever. As long as you have a voice, you can, if you have a little home studio, my son built me this little, do-it-yourself studio. We invested in some mics, and I can file it anywhere in the world. So it's something I thought I wanted to do. So when my children went away and went off to college, and they were both, I actually did coach them because at home when they went out to do things, we'd practice and I would give them feedback. They took it, it worked well, and they were both very good at that. So, my husband's an engineer, and they always say, well, how come your kids both ended up being more like you? And I said, well, I guess the parent who spent more time doing that kind of thing. My husband said, if you're not interested in engineering, that's perfectly fine by me. And so none of them were interested in engineering, but they were interested in the things that I was interested in, and they did it.
What did they pursue later on?
Well, my son's a lawyer and my daughter's a professor of English. Yeah.
Wow. Great.
So they are using the gift of the gab in some ways, aren't they?
Wonderful. May I just see the book?
Oh, of course. course.
Yeah, so now let's shift to this book, and the title is Good Innings, The Extraordinary and Ordinary Life of Lily Tharoor. And clearly it's a biography on your mom, who was a very pivotal matriarch, right, for you, and a very strong pillar for you and your family. So can you share a little bit more about some of your fondest memories with her, and what are the valuable lessons that the Tharoor siblings learned from her?
Sure. Well, I have to digress a little or go back a little, give you a little backstory. My father was adored and loved and cherished, and everybody knew him and everybody adored him. And he passed away at a very early age. He was only 63 when he died, and he had been a heart patient all his life. My mother was sort of somebody, who always said, oh, she's always making you do stuff, that kind of thing. I felt she got a bad rap. And I felt it was important to tell her story. And I also think it's important to tell the story of so many women. This book is really a tribute to women. This book is not just a tribute to my mother. And I say that wherever I go, because women do so much, sometimes only in the background, sometimes they are the silent sort of supporter of the roaring successes of their husbands' careers. Of course, today I am speaking to a group of people who I'm sure are exceptionally successful on their own, but as even Indra Nui says in all those reels that come on Instagram, you can't be a perfect mother and the CEO of a company at the same time. Something gives. And so we're multitasking, we're doing so much. I worked in nonprofit partly because my husband was a Silicon Valley drone. We lived in California. He's always at work. And if you have any sort of aspirations for your children in terms of extracurricular talents, etc., if I had sort of gone out and done something different, my kids, I would have personally felt, didn't get the kind of attention and parenting that I had wanted to give, like I had received. So in many ways, I've sort of come back and done what I want to do now, the things that I could have done earlier, and the kind of things that would make my mother proud. So, she used to be very, very unhappy that I stayed home for 7 years, and I had gone to America as an undergraduate on a full scholarship, which in Calcutta in those days was very, very rare. People did not go on undergraduate scholarships. They did go to graduate school. So she had seen me as, an academic star and all of that. And she came home to see us, the babies. And I was at home and I was loading the dishwasher and playing with the kids and doing all of that. And she just somehow thought I had failed, You're not doing, she didn't think that raising the kids was good enough. She always thought that what she did wasn't good enough. And so, it was something that I always heard from her. Why can't you? She'd say, go and do an MBA. And I said, I don't want to do an MBA. But, so in her way, she thought that meant, and I said, I already have a graduate degree, I don't have to go do an MBA. She said, then why are you at home? I said, it's not because I can't get a job, it's because I don't want to leave the kids. So anyway, I didn't go out to work outside the home until my son went to kindergarten. And I'm saying, so this book comes from, it's entirely a personal book. When you say it's a biography, it is a biography in that it starts with my mother's birth in Collingwood, and it goes all the way to her sending WhatsApps forwards to all of us even today, asking us to do various things. So it is a biography in that it follows a traditional timeline, but it is essentially, it's an intimate portrayal of my mother based on my memories of her and how she has influenced us all these years. So, of course, I had to dip in a little bit to family stories, to things I've heard, corroborate, so that it's not fiction, but in some ways it's sort of creative nonfiction, because what I've also done to make the book interesting, I've only selected at each stage of her life interesting stories that will resonate with the reader and that will hopefully inspire the next generation, or even some of us, it'll remind us of things we've all gone through, and for the next generation, maybe some stories that they can learn from. And that's been wonderful. And in fact, I've gone in New York and in Pune recently, I was on stage in a panel with this book with a girl who's co-written Alik Padamsi's memoir. So it was Alik Padamsi lived outside. Do you know who Alik Padamsi is? All of you, and we all watched his plays in Bombay and all of that. He's actually older than my dad, so he's about 10 years older than my mother, but still sort of similar generation. But even I grew up as a teenager thinking of him as this maverick and unbelievable, and he did these incredible plays, and his book is called Let Me Hijack Your Mind. And it's all about different ways in which he wants to inspire the next generation. So somebody must have seen the synergy between this book and that, because both in New York and in India, we've been on panels together discussing this book. So it's sort of interesting that here is my mother, who sees herself as a village woman who doesn't have a convent education, whose story is being on stage with someone who is considered the guru of advertising, one of the greatest theatre personalities, a man who definitely had a number of college degrees. My mother's education was the school of life.
So that's wonderful.
So I wrote this book to give voice to that.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So now Good Innings kind of says it all. It's a tribute to your mother, but it's also, like you said, you have a different intent and inspiration behind writing the book. I find it very interesting that you had this juxtaposition of extraordinary and ordinary together. So I was curious, you do start with anecdotes, right, of every chapter, and then you go on to write your reflection. But why the subtitle of Extraordinary and Ordinary? Can you elaborate
it is
on how you coined that subtitle?
Well, it's an interesting composite title, and one that, as full confession, when I sent the cover page, I sent the picture because they gave me two options of pictures, and the title, it was positioned, and that was the first time I sent it to the siblings saying, which picture of mummy do you think will work or whatever. And my brother saw the title and he said, Good Innings? Why have you put Good Innings? That's a cricket reference, and your mum doesn't even like cricket. She doesn't know anything about cricket. So I had to chide him. If he comes to Hyderabad, you can tell him, Mummy, whenever you ask her, it's because, she learnt English in London. She had learnt it in school when she was in the village, but hadn't really spoken much English. And she realized when she was in London, in order to be independent, and she was a very independent woman, without English it's hard. She wouldn't be able to take my brother for a doctor's appointment. He was born in London, travel on a bus or do anything else. So she used to listen to Desert Island Discs, Roy Plumley, which, by the way, the show is still on and it's brilliant. I love it. It's where he interviews famous personalities and asks them to choose 8 discs so that you get to hear music as well. 8 discs and some stories behind those discs and why they were chosen. And then the idea of the premise of Desert Island Discs is that at the end of the whole story, you're going to be banished to a desert island and your discs are going to get swept into the ocean, and if you had to save one disc, which one would you save? So it's a lovely concept, and you can get to hear, even today, Malcolm Gladwell or John McEnroe or, all kinds of interesting people on Desert Island Disc. Mom used to listen to that just to learn how to speak conversational English, and she learned. And so a lot of the sort of English expressions she uses are very sort of English, English as in British. When you ask her how are you doing? Oh, I've had good innings, So it's very much something she says, and not necessarily anything to do with cricket. But when you think of innings today for all of us, an innings is, around in some ways. And to have had good innings is to have had many good rounds, right, of anything. The extraordinary, ordinary, my mother always says, I am an ordinary woman who was born in a village. I am not convent educated like my daughters. That's one of my mom's favorite lines. So we're always teasing her, saying, that's an old excuse. We can't use that anymore. And what do you mean you're not ordinary? You're extraordinary. And so the title came from that.
Wonderful. Would you like to share a reading from the book?
Would anybody like to hear something? So what
Let's
I
hear
did
from
with this book, which is a little different, since I had the... what is a little different about it, as I said, it's not a traditional biography. It is a book that comes from my memories, with, of course, fact checks and all of that in terms of specific details and dates. But one of the most important things that my mother remembers having done is what I'm going to read to you about. And I have to find it. I didn't mark it, but it is, I think... So I start each chapter in my mother's voice. So this is just a device, a literary device. It's not specifically the language she would use, but the idea is, as you said, it's in first person, it's my mother thinking, and then the second part of the chapter is the third person narrative. And that sort of breaks up the story a little bit in an interesting way from my perspective, and readers have said
so
they've
your
enjoyed
mom's
that.
perspective, was that from like a journal, or it was just your
No,
recollection
just me.
of?
It's just me.
Okay,
It's just
interesting,
me.
interesting.
I mean, we spent a lot of time together. I was not someone who went off to America and then didn't come back for 9 years. I saw my parents every year. I came home every year. I brought the kids home every year. When my father passed away, she would come to us all the time. So India was very much part of our life. My mother was very much part of our life. And this book, you will see different ways she's even influenced my own children. And that just shows she was very ambitious for her kids. She was very driven. She believed in, that age is just a number. She believed that you can't cross the ocean merely by looking at it. Lots of things like that. And so these are all stories that give credence to those aphorisms. The achievement I'm most proud of was building my lily cottage in Kovaipudur, a beautiful suburb in the outskirts of the city and closer to Palakkad and my mother. I had always wanted an independent house and described my ideas to the architect for him to draw on paper. Then I contacted a builder. The upper floor of the house had a separate entrance so that I could rent that portion and earn a monthly income. I thought it was an ingenious plan. The ground floor had a large room where I could gather my friends and devotees for Sai bhajans. This was something I'd always wanted to do. With God's grace, I managed it all on my own. My children had wanted me to buy a flat, which would be safer and easier to maintain, but I needed to build this house with a front courtyard for the tulsi to grow and grace the house. This was a dream that I had for a long time, and I was able to fulfill it. I really enjoyed and appreciated my mother's frequent visits when she stayed with me in Lily Cottage. We were both strong, opinionated women. Though she didn't say it directly to me, I know that she was impressed by what I had built on my own. I lived in the house with only part-time help and drove the 90-minute distance on my own to Mundarath to spend a few days with my mother every month. Mundarath is our Tharavad. A Tharavad is your ancestral home. My 3 children made the effort to come from abroad every other year with their children and stayed with me in this house as well. But I had only lived a few years in my Lily cottage when the house was robbed while I was away on a meditation retreat. I felt the watchman must have partnered with the thief to have planned this robbery so cleverly. Anyway, after that robbery, I did not have the courage to live in the house alone. Our past experience as landlords made me wary of renting the house to a tenant. I asked a friend to find me a buyer right away. Shashi thinks I made a point to build the place because I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it. He said that once I had done the job to my satisfaction, I sold the house. Perhaps he is right. That chapter then continues, with her years in Coimbatore. So each chapter is sort of different parts of India where she's lived.
So, Shobhaji, what's your latest book to make its debut, and what are your future writing plans?
Well, I'm writing away busily all the time. I have a book that just came out last week, and it's a book for children called Look Before You Leap. And it's a collection of stories, but what we're doing is, rather than just... Sorry, I forgot. It's a collection of stories that are from the classics. So we have Panchatantra stories and Aesop's fables and all of that, but I'm tracing not aphorisms, but idioms that have come from these stories that we use today, every day. So there's a little bit of that sort of pedagogical hook to the storytelling. And this is book 2 of a collection of stories that Red Panda, which is Westland, had wanted me to write 3 books called Treasure Trove of Timeless Tales. So they said that they wanted me to introduce the old classics to children. So the first book is called treasure trove of timeless tales, and it has stories from the past. But my whole thesis with that book was one world, many stories, one world. So we have stories that actually, for instance, there's a story called Ison Boshi in that book, which is very, very similar to Tom Thumb or Thumbelina that you may have read. And so I tell the children when I read from them, and as well as in my author's note, that initially, of course, the whole storytelling tradition was an oral tradition. It's only later that we started putting things down. And even today, there's argument about whether the Panchatantra came first or the Aesop's fables came first. But the idea is that kind of storytelling as a way to either teach morals or a way to tell stories and entertain or a way to make connections was there as part in time memorial, for a long, long time. And I'm showing that even though the stories may seem different, they're very similar in different parts of the world. And many of them are origin stories. So we have stories even in our own epics that are origin stories of why, for instance, did the little squirrel have the marks at the back, and we say that Rama blessed that squirrel. We grew up learning that from our grandmothers or whatever. But there is the Native American stories that I have in this book, the first book that I wrote, of the three. We have a story called How Did the Animals Get Sunlight? And it's a Native American story that, I read many versions of and then retold. They talk about squirrels and possums and spiders, and essentially talk about how they, why is the eagle bald? It's because when he went close to the sun, it got burnt off. So, all these interesting stories, that idea of where things come from is native to all of us, that ultimately, as you said, thank you, we're all global citizens, we're all members, we're all part of the same shared planet. We're all, we all have our foot in many different worlds. Many of us have children abroad or somebody else somewhere else or in another city. Or even if we are from Kerala, we're part of a diasporic Malayalam population that went somewhere else. So, we're all part of the same picture. We all share similar journeys.
It's kind of reminding me of Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, where he actually had looked at all the different myths and fables and folk tales from all across the world and recognized that there was this unique formula for the hero's journey. And it all has kind of like a coming to the mission and that struggle and challenge and then triumphing to the next level. And there's a mentor, there's certain elements that come into that hero story. Do you feel that the ones that you're working on, do they have any similar theme to convey?
So this particular set is just essentially, they're all retellings. The first book, I snuck in about 4 of my own stories, and the publisher let it go because I find that more exciting than just retelling stories. But that's this particular lot. I have another picture book coming out with another publisher sometime later this year. And then I have a very exciting hybrid book that I've already signed the contract for that will be brought out by HarperCollins, which is called Use Your Words. And it's essentially about the sound of words, the beauty of words, how words can affect change in so many different ways.
I can't imagine a more perfect person for it to come from. It has to come from the throughout.
When people say, how come you do voiceovers and you do this and they're all connected. Even in voiceover, whether you're reading an audiobook or whether you're selling a product, it's still telling a story, isn't it? And the idea of, and as a non-profit grant writer in some ways, as a director of development, again, I'm giving compelling stories so that we could get funding for projects. It's all a matter of telling stories. And stories are what brings us all to each other. We yoke our connections that way.
So I'm an educator for over 25 years, and we know that there's the 4 C's of the 21st century, critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and then communication. I added a 5th C, which is character, because you can't have competence and intelligence without ethics. But for the communication, in light of the last project you talked about words, right? The power of words, the sound of words. As a writer, what advice would you have? Many of them are young, mothers, have children, maybe, high school or college. But what can we do about enhancing our 21st century skill of communication?
Right.
in the digital age that we're living in. I mean, we have access to a lot of audio visual, technology. So people aren't reading as much, they're not consuming as much from reading like a hard book, but a lot of it is through a smart device. So in light of the times of today, how can we as global citizens enhance our communication and that of our children's?
No, you're right. I mean, it's a very tough time in some ways, but I'm still very enthusiastic because whenever I go to schools, I have so many questions from children, even more than from adults. They're so excited. They're so interested. They seem to talk about the fact that they're all writing at home. They read. So, I mean, what can we do to become a better writer? Of course, you should read. I mean, and that's not my science. That's true. Unless you read, you're not really going to be able to write. But I think the onus is on writers of children's books to keep that element in mind, that children very often, for instance, are satisfied with shorter stories, or that they need to digest things in smaller increments, or that they need a visual element to things. So, for instance, in that retelling book where I told you I snuck in some stories, I threw in something called, and I talked about Flaubert's mot juste, which is the perfect word, I wrote examples of 10 100-word stories. And then I told the children with a little note, go out and write 100-word stories. It has to be 100, not 101, and not 98 or 99. How do we do that? If you write a 98 word, think of another adjective you could add to sort of give color to that part of the story that you were doing. If you've written too much, maybe you can think of one word to explain a phrase. So it helps you use your vocabulary better as well. The stories obviously will not have a traditional narrative arc of suspense and all of that if it's a very short story. I wish I had that book with me, but I'm quite pleased with the 100-word stories I wrote. They're quite kind of fun, and the kids love it when I read it to them. And so many teachers at schools later told me they went back to school and made the kids do these 100-word stories. And then we talk about, 64 words is a sesstude. And I believe there's even shorter ones. I'm not saying that become an advocate for flash fiction or 3-line stories. We have those too. There are contests now for short stories, which means no more than 5 lines. And people, these are all fun writing exercises. So if we start doing that, it's a way to do it, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's so many permutations and combinations of how we can build our verbal linguistic intelligence. So
exactly.
I've been an advocate for multiple intelligence, and really, I mean, the sky is the limit, right, as to how we can.
And the word book I'm doing, I'm grateful, very grateful that the publishers are kind enough to pick these books up, because they could say this doesn't make any sense. I mean, the only thing she first asked me, she says, is this a book for kids or for adults? And so then we added, I said, no, the idea was for older kids. And so I added in another element. But that book, the word book that I'm doing, will have I go from A to Z, and each letter has games associated with the letter that kids can play. I also have poems which illustrate vocabulary. I've written poems about parts of speech and other things, so that even something which children may find as boring as grammar, if it's done in a sort of entertaining way, it could be fun.
And which is this book again?
The one that hasn't come out yet, but it's with
okay.
HarperCollins. It's called Use Your Words, or it's about words.
That's going to be
We
a
may
very
change the
interesting one
title.
for education,
it'll be fun.
educators especially.
Yeah. Well, the poetry book of mine is also very much for educators. And again, I sound like I'm just selling the books, but really they're good books. The poetry book won a Publishing Next award for ages 8+. It's because I've done something very unusual. The first half of the book, I introduced 9 poetic forms. Poetic forms as in, whether it's a complicated one like a villanelle or a sonnet, to a haiku or an acrostic or a limerick. I'm introducing the poetic form in the form of the poem. And then I give you example poems to illustrate what they are. So, for instance, the sonnet poem tells you in 14 lines with an octave and a sestet what is a sonnet. A sonnet is an interesting poem. Its length is not a matter of your choice. So it's an iambic pentameter, and you can hear the da-dum, the dan-dum, the long and short syllable of iambic pentameter in that poem. But what makes it exciting to kids is that my example poem is same, 14 lines, octave, sestet, everything. You wouldn't even think it's a sonnet, even though it follows the exact rhyme scheme, because we're talking about junk food and about getting a tummy ache because you threw away the lunch mum packed and you ate all kinds of naughty things. And they just love it. And they realize, oh my God, we could write a sonnet too, if we weren't writing, just about war or death or something else, right?
I'd love to, especially that one, know more about that.
Please.
So last question, I know we have, a whole group of literary enthusiasts here, but my last question is, what's one valuable kind of advice that you would like to give to us and to those us raising the next gen to be a great foundation for, being happy, being successful, being articulate and very wise with our words.
Be authentic.
Because communication, creates the human condition. So one last set of nice advice for
I
all.
say be authentic. I think that's the most important thing. Whether it's in conversation, people say, oh, I have a nice voice, can I be a voiceover talent? And I say, well, really speaking, voiceover talent isn't. Even if you had a granular voice like Bob Dylan, you could be a voice talent. It's not really about having a good voice, it's about how you use it. And when you're saying your story, you're effective if you're being sincere in telling the story. If you're not, immediately it sounds like one of those announcer voices and it just doesn't work, right? So I think authenticity, even if we're not excited, perhaps I seem a little tired today, but usually when I go out to schools, I think the children hear in me my excitement about the books. And when you hear that excitement, that's the authenticity, then they're just as excited too, because I genuinely, and once the book is out there, I'm very excited about it. And that's what it is. And even this book, which it was such a privilege for me to be able to think back on my mother's life and write a book about her. And technically, all of you were supposed to get a copy of this book, but I don't know if it's arrived yet. Evidently, we have had some issues.
We'll make you sign by the evening and send it over to her.
Okay. Usually the wonderful sessions with Prabha Khaithan, all of you invited guests would get a copy of the book signed by me. And I'm sorry, but evidently there's been some delay with the books getting here. So
But it's an intimate group, so we can distribute.
yeah, I'd be happy to sign it in my... So everybody who was here, if you would give us your names.
We have most of the names and numbers. Few of you
If you haven't, if you would put it down, then you'll definitely get a copy. I'd love for all of you to read this book, and then please tell me what you think of it. You're very welcome. I'm sorry why we haven't got it yet. Yeah. So authentic, authentic as a voice talent, authentic as a writer, excited about what you're doing so that others can be excited as well. Don't you feel that? An enthused teacher is so much more excited than
Passion
someone...
will,
yeah,
come through.
I know for a fact that I did
It's
not enjoy
magnetic, right?
economics in school, and I keep thinking I bet I wouldn't have been such a dud in economics if I'd had a better teacher. Because all we did is I read aloud chapters and chapters and then we went home. So, whatever little you know about macro and microeconomics is something you learnt on your own.
So with that, thank you so much, Shobha ji.
Thank
I'd
you.
like to open up
Open it
the
up to the
floor for any questions that you have for Shobha ji. And I can give my mic,
Mine? No.
or this mic, yes. Yes.
Thank
There's
you
a
so much for
question
your
here.
thoughtful
Ajay?
questions.
Ajay, here.
I have a request. Hi, everyone. I'm Poonam, and I'm lucky enough to know the entire family somehow. So
Somehow we can't hear you. You're speaking too softly.
Okay, because of my condition, I'm a little dizzy because of the fibro. So I have something to share. I'm Poonam. I have a request, and first I want to ask you, ma'am, that what do you think about the AI generation? Because you have been talking about being authentic, and I certainly believe all of us need to be authentic, and our identity, it's somewhere getting lost in the generation.
Yes.
So what do you really have suggestions for, or do we really go in a policy way, especially for education and for kids, then how do we go about this? Because I think the originality and the authenticity is lacking, and as you said that, you had an exercise where you should be using 100 words, not 98 or, 101. But today, you can just go to an AI,
And probably
write the
do it.
subject, and you get it in 2 minutes. Something which could take 3 days or 4 days for people would do it for a minute. And I think it is affecting the brains, or, the authenticity and the originality and the growing up. So what do you want to do about this?
So, there's very little I can do about it, really, unfortunately. I'll be honest with you, I have never used AI. I guess I'm not a Luddite. I do use the computer. I type on the computer. I'm doing all of that. And I'm on social media. Nowadays, authors have to market themselves as well. So we're all out there. But, a lot of technology is still new for someone of my generation. I mean, now there's, I used to know Slack and I used to know some others, but then there's, whatever it is, the one with the bird. There's many other ways of getting on social media. So things keep growing, and AI is one of them. I had thought AI was like, it's useful. It can be side by side with writing because it's like using an Excel program when you want to do math, or using a calculator. Yes, it's true. It prevents us. I mean, I, for instance, still remember the phone numbers of all my friends whose numbers I had before I had a smartphone. I remember their birthdays, their phone numbers. Now, even my mother's number, because it was all after this, her new number and her connections in Delhi, I usually just press mom. So I don't, I could make an error if somebody asked me to just now tell me what is your mother's number. I may not know it. So we are losing out when we take these easy ways of doing things. Now, there are people going to be able to do it. I mean, I have a friend who teaches at a community college. She teaches English. And I said, aren't kids, how do you know that somebody's not writing these papers using AI? I asked the same question. And she said, well, what they have to do is, as teachers, one of their rules in their college is that they try to do most of the tests at home, in front of in class, but any research paper that's done outside, if a student who normally doesn't do very well ends up writing this brilliant paper, then they call the students in and quiz them on their paper. And what she said is, her rule is, if the child asks all kinds of questions about the paper that's been done, and if they're able to answer it effectively, usefully, and all of that, now if they're very skilled at cheating and doing AI, maybe they'll still answer it and get the A. She says, if they're able to answer the questions, if I'm able to catch them out on various things, and they give me reasonable answers, I just give it to them as an A. I have to believe that they've done it themselves. Now, I don't know. I'm sure the programming of AI will get to a point where you can actually catch it. Remember, there used to be software to catch plagiarism. I don't know if you remember. Yeah. So similarly, there may be some software to catch AI. I don't know. There is already. Okay, there you are. I've never used it. In fact, I've told myself while I was in India, because people have been asking a lot about AI, I said, I have to go home now and try to see, when I get back, I'm going to see, what is it like to do AI? Do I feed it information? I thought of it as a search tool. Like I saw with a friend at dinner once, we looked on the phone and we said, 3 days in Lisboa, what can we do there or something? And AI gathered it all together and gave us a 3-day itinerary. I thought that was brilliant, fantastic. Now, of course, I would rather ask a friend who'd been there maybe than this, but it's still worth it. Juhi, you work for Microsoft, right? You might be able to tell us.
Did for several years.
Oh, you did for several years. Do you have an AI answer that's far sounder than mine?
Well, there's two schools of thought for AI. One is that obviously the ethics around AI and how it can be controlled, and the other is the impact that it can have on healthcare, agriculture, and all sorts of things. And a lot of the ethics argument with AI is in fact how. So a lot of the debate around the ethics of AI is what is overtaking all the people who are in favor of AI. So it's ethical AI that is now the move. The thrust is to try and have ethical AI integrated into apps, integrated into and adopted into any technology. But that's a long way off for now. Yeah.
But you think ultimately, the human thought process, the emotional aspect of writing, I can't imagine that AI can come into all of that. But I told you I'm uneducated about AI, so I don't know.
It can't replace the human brain completely.
Yeah, it can't, obviously, yeah.
So AI, from the little knowledge that I have, I'm completely a dud at computers, but anyway. So from what I would understand, it's all fed by, like get really low. So I think it is something that the humans are feeding into it.
Yes, of course.
Which is kind of working on putting...
Yeah, you have to prompt it.
Yeah, whether you want to put it as ABC or ACB, whatever sounds good. I think somebody's already taught it, put that into the system. So I guess there is a human intervention at every stage. But yeah, what about the people who are using it? Are they using their brains at any point of time, or are they just grabbing somebody else's thoughts?
Yeah, exactly.
But they're getting caught out.
Yes.
Often.
Again, that is again the human intervention where we are putting the stops and checks and yeah.
So can we move on to the next question for Shobha ji?
I just had another
okay, sure.
request to all the Tharoors. Can you please start a podcast?
My sister's the podcaster, remember? So I
Okay.
have a sister, a younger sister, and we didn't really speak very much about her. She lives in London, and she does this podcast called, I think now it's called Stories Seldom Told, but it used to be called Unconscious Bias. And it's a very interesting podcast. She speaks to people from all walks of life and from all parts of the world, and essentially gives them a forum to tell their story. And the only little sort of crux of it, or the thesis of each story, is that there has to be a little bit of an element of what unconscious bias, and in what ways, how do they understand the term, and in what ways have their lives been affected by it. But it's very interesting, so please look it up. We've already got a
Can you share
podcast
the name
in the
again?
family.
Can you share the name again?
It's called Stories Seldom Told, and my sister's name is Shobha Tharoor. And she started it during the pandemic, and now it's huge.
It was an absolutely immersing conversation.
Thank you.
I was listening to every word of yours.
I
And
hope you'll read every word of the book
yes,
as well.
I would. I too come from a similar background. I've done literature. I'm an educator too.
Oh, wow.
And I'm passionate about reading and writing too. And there are many similarities. Like I grew up reading a lot of books from my childhood, like comics like Richie Rich, Dennis the Menace, and books like Secret Seven, Famous Five. All these till Mills and Boons also. to spy thrillers.
Until
and
you
all.
found out that all the stories sounded the same, and then you lose
And
interest
then
in Milton
Shakespeare
Book.
and all that in literature. My question is, with brilliant minds that we have in writing as writers in various languages,
Yes.
why is it that India couldn't create a Harry Potter, a character like that, which became globally famous, that every child, connects
But
with
I
it?
think, I was thinking, isn't it Ashok Rajagopalan's, what is it, Gajapati, Kulapati, the little elephant? That's a children's book. I read it. I think it's phenomenal. I believe he's written many in the series. What an incredible idea.
We have
If you go to
Chowdhury
children,
also,
if you go
but-
to schools, they all know that book. Everybody knows I'm probably saying it wrong, Gajapati, Kalapati, I think it is. This elephant, and he's sneezing, and, it's a little, they're short picture books, but very interesting characters. And, I still remember some of the books that I've bought. I mean, the Amar Chitra Katha stories we created
Yes, of
those.
course.
And those are wonderful stories that children all over the world have read and enjoyed. So
No,
I
one
haven't-
single character, which appeal to. Even now, my granddaughter
Since
reads.
I'm
all the
reading other
series.
language books only in translation, and I confess, even Hindi books, which I studied Sahitya ke Itihas in school, but I still don't read a Hindi book. I read it translated in English because it's just easier for me to do. So I don't know what's being written in other languages, but for instance, yesterday my brother gets a lot of books because people want blurbs and all of that. I found a collection of poems that were translated from the Marathi yesterday for adults. And they were just brilliant. I just loved it, the poems. And I thought I would never have known unless this book came to his house and we were opening up the mail. So we may have Harry Potters and even greater things in other languages in India that I'm not aware of. Sorry if that's, yeah.
Be globally famous. What I
Oh.
mean to say, it connects every child from every part of the world.
True.
And they love to read.
It'll happen, like
We
at the...
have creative minds.
We
I mean,
do,
you
of course we
yourself
will. And so many things we've done in
are one.
Didn't we have who? Oh. Yes. Well, though Rudyard Kipling one is a racist who wanted to control the savages, but it's true he did write some good children's books. I don't usually talk about him.
I was saying Malgudi Days is another brilliant one.
Yeah. But Malgudi Days, is it for children? No. He's very simple, but you're right. And Malgudi Days they talk about even in America, yes. R.K. Narayan. In fact, R.K. Narayan's English and every way of writing is very simple. Yeah.
Shobha,
Good
I
point.
have one question.
Yes.
I just wanted to ask, do you write one book at a time, or you have like 2, 3 going on and then you go back and forth? Like we artists do that, we have 2, 3 canvases and we do this and go there.
Right.
And
Usually I'm working on one story at a time. The writing part for me is actually doesn't take very long. What takes me a long time to do is knowing how to frame the book. So even the children's book I wrote on Raja Ravi Varma, the prince with a paintbrush, which is really another lovely produced book, I had originally in my head said, kids, whenever I meet children here, they don't seem to know Ravi Varma. I'm so surprised, because we in South India have grown up seeing his pictures and, and he's informed calendars and, his stories, and even the Amar Chatrakatha kind of art is from Ravi Varma. But if you go to North India and you meet children in schools, they all know Van Gogh or Mona Lisa, and, they can recognize art from other parts of the world. Nobody knew it. So I said, I'm going to write it. And so I wrote a poem, thinking it'll be a picture book written in verse. And I met one of the publishers, Red Panda Publishers, Karthika actually, who's a senior publisher, not in the children's section, at a party, and we were talking, and I said, you need to get someone to write this. And she said, will you do it? And I said, well, I've already written something in poetry. She said, no, not poetry. Why don't you write a biography? And I thought, so I said, I'll think about it, and went home. And I spent a month or two thinking about it and thought, a conventional biography, and I didn't want to do a scholarly book and do research. I wanted to write an entertaining children's book. My whole idea is I wanted kids to be able to recognize his paintings. And not all, it'll be a short book, so it's about a 2,000 or 3,000 word book. But we were able to put, because his art is in the public domain. He passed away, a long time ago. So we don't need permission to put his art in a book. And so I was able to show, Galaxy of Musicians, which is very famous, or Jatayuvad, or, any of those paintings in the book. And so I thought, how do I do it so it's not a boring book? Because a biography, children will tell me, is boring. That's very often that happens. Even this, if you were just talking about Lily Tharoor was born here, went here, did that, maybe people wouldn't want to read it. But the way this book is written, it's written in simple, propulsive prose, which is the way my mother speaks in many ways. It's not her language. I'm not, mimicking her or ventriloquizing her. But it's a particular kind of style and writing that I think any one of you will enjoy and want to finish. You know what I mean? It's not going to be like a dull biography. So similarly with the illustrated biography, what I did was I spent a long time thinking, how do I write the story? And then I did it very simple, which anybody could have done, but I enjoyed it because I had to think. Once I got the hook, then it was easy to do it, just do the research. I had an 8-year-old child is in the story thinking about, is in school, and the teacher asked to name an artist, and she says Van Gogh, and then somebody else says Ravi Varma, Raja Ravi Varma, and she doesn't know who it is, so she goes home and asks her mother, and then the mother and she are discovering about the artist. And so in this story, the way I've written it, we have like a double narrative. So we have the story of Ravi Varma, where he was born, what he did, how he painted, etc. But we also have the child thinking. So every time we get to Ravi Varma got married at the age of 18 and to a 12-year-old girl, the girl has a comic bubble and she's saying, oh my God, that means in 4 years I'd have to get married. Thank God today I don't have to do that. And so that made the story interesting. And at the end we have a whole section of fun facts about the fact that Kilimanur, where he was born, they didn't even have a post office. And then even though he's never been abroad, Ravi Varma's paintings were sent to Vienna and to Chicago, the thing of, what was that big conference of religions where Vivekananda spoke. At that place they sent art out. He's won all kinds of awards. So in some ways he was an ambassador for India in the long time ago, but he had never been abroad. So I put in all of those facts at the back of the book as well, and how he got the title Raja. He was not a prince. So, this book was voted by some kids as the best book of the year, again, because we made the story more interesting. So that is how I do what I do. Do I work on two things at the same time? Sometimes when I'm finishing off a book, I could be finishing it, but I'm still thinking in my head about framing the other one. And this series of short stories, they want a third book. So I'm wondering now, how do I do retelling again? I don't want to do the same Panchatantra and all. I like Tennali Raman, but somebody's already done it. Because when I did Tennali Raman for the videos, I got a lot of feedback that nobody knew those stories. So I thought, well, those stories are worth retelling, except I think Puffin's already just brought out a book. So I'm not going to retell Tennali Raman. I'm now proposing that my third book of retellings will be stories from all over the world. world, and we'll do 26 stories, so from A to Z, the 26 letters of the alphabet, and I'm going to do 26 countries. So I thought I will, and so I'll have to do a lot of research. It's going to take me time, but I thought I will do, like Angola or something unusual, Eritrea. We've got these incredible stories, sad stories, good stories, This way the children will sort of have a little bit of a geography lesson as well, and I can light a little blurb. Short stories for kids. It won't be very. These are all the children's short stories that are being commissioned by Red Panda. They're about a 125-page book, so it's not that long.
Nice, thank you.
Thank you.
I think
I
we
have a question.
one last question for somebody that hasn't asked yet, if you don't mind first.
She made a comment. You can let's make it 2 questions.
Okay. Then we have to wind up.
Yeah.
Thank you for choosing Hyderabad and
Thank
making
you
this
for your
one of your
invitation.
stops. So now that you're doing the story from 26 countries, we have the legendary Nizam from here. Maybe you could include some amazing stories, like how he went and bought all the Rolls Royces because he was denied. Yeah, it's some fiction. Yeah, but still, the fiction. Some people say it is true and some it's fiction. Oh, but Princess Ezra said there's an
we have
element
so
of
many
truth.
stories in India.
Yeah.
So many stories.
So many. And we also have
And
these
only so
legendary
little
kings, and
time,
we have
yeah.
Rudramadevi, and we have so many people. Maybe you
I
could
also want
educate.
very much to write a collection of stories for adults.
Yeah. Now my
Because I
question
was,
is this.
yeah.
Sorry.
No.
Since there is less time, I'm kind of speeding up. You said earlier that a writer should be authentic. Now, is authentic imagination an oxymoron?
That's a very good question. No, what I meant was we need to be sincere in any activity we do. So if we think of what we're doing as faltu baat, it's not going to come through to children, right? So if you're writing for children just for some time pass, it's not going to work. Every job we do, even if it may look like a 30-page book, which is what a picture book is, cannot be more than 32 pages. But if you really want that book to endure and you want the child to go back in their house and pick it up and read it, it's got to be something special. Now, everybody thinks their books are special, but what I mean by that is we really need to put in that kind of energy. As I said, there are many, many books I've read over the years, novels, and, because I don't read as many children's books, I've been reading a lot of adult stuff. I've never really gone back and read it again. That's just not my thing, because there's something new to read. Whereas with these children's books, I'm certainly hoping that you'll go back and read it again and again, so it's got to be good. That's what I meant. But what you said is a very good point. Thanks. Yes.
So, today we have a lot of media right in the face.
Right.
So there's films, there's books not as, there's books not as much as movies right in the face of people. And everybody gets influenced, everybody gets carried away with all these. The latest one is, in my opinion, the little bit I saw, I think it's the most ridiculous thing, that movie Animal.
Which I didn't see.
So, anyway, I haven't seen it. There were
I
just
heard
snippets
it's
of
just
that.
gratuitous
So,
violence, so I thought, well...
Absolutely. So, every book, that especially what's written for children, comes with some kind of a moral, comes with some kind of a lesson. The children are supposed to learn something good out of it.
Well, it's true that I tend to do that. A lot of children's books don't necessarily come with a moral. They may learn vocabulary from it, or they may learn something.
Good,
yes.
something good. But generally, they don't teach something bad. Now,
Right.
what I have seen is movies being such, any kind of media, anything on the screen, especially today, with screen phones, smartphones, there's so much happening. How do you think we could curtail this kind of effect on the children, more so from the perspective of cutting down those things? Is there something that you would suggest?
I mean, ultimately, it's in the hands of the parents. Even books that are read, it's either the teacher or the librarian or your parent who's the curator of the books that are picked up to read. And, sometimes the cover of the book is appealing to a mother or a father, and they pick it up rather than what's inside the pages, right? So, we just can hope and pray and just lead by example in whatever small world that we're in. I think that's all I can
Maybe
say.
a little book on media literacy. and how to be a discerning consumer of information, whether it's written or, but because I think we need to, the critical media literacy that we need to have.
I have a political comment on that. Today there's fake news, like fake news in America, where we have something called Fox News, is a television channel that 30 to 40% of Americans only learn their news from Fox News, and how much of it is truth, one doesn't really know. And it's the same thing. There is literally WhatsApp University in its height, and everybody in India has a smartphone. So, if you can't use your own thinking to discern the chaff from the grain of this information, it's a sorry battle. Ultimately, we can only do the best we can in the little circle that we're in.
What's the magic of Palakkad that all scholars are born?
I don't know if all scholars come from Palakkad.
Yeah, many of them.
No, Palakkad is a very interesting district, and it is very close to Tamil Nadu. It's in Kerala, but it is close to Tamil Nadu. And so we from that part of Kerala grew up speaking a Malayalam that until I was an adult, I didn't realize that I was using a lot of Tamil in my Malayalam. And it's only, even though you know that Coimbatore is next door and that's Tamil Nadu and all of that, didn't really know it, and it is a very unusual and interesting place, that's true.
Thank you so much, Shobha
Thank
ji.
you.
So I now hand over to Mansi for
Thank
the
you
vote of
so
thanks.
much. It was wonderful questions, really appreciated. And from all of you, thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you, Shobhaji, for an intriguing and lovely session. We could hear you more and more, but we are time-bound here. On behalf of Foundation, I formally thank Ms. Shobha Tharoor Srinivasan. Your insights have been truly given food for thought for this evening. I would love to thank Ms. Anjum Babu Khan for beautifully guiding the conversation with her apt set of questions. Today's event is in collaboration with Trident Hotel for giving us this beautiful hall and for all the impeccable hospitality. A big gratitude to our patron Shree Cements Limited and Ehsas Women of Hyderabad for our support. Prabhakitan Foundation promotes cross-state cultural understanding and appreciation. A mosaic of cultures forms the backbone of our nation, contributing to its vibrancy and richness. This is to support our ongoing efforts to foster unity and appreciation of rich cultural heritage across India's diverse states. Keeping this in mind, we are pleased to present author with one such giveaway of Madhubani Dupatta on behalf of the team.
Aren't I a lucky girl? Thank you.
Madhubani hand paint. It is said that inhabitants of Mithila region, currently Bihar, painted their homes and streets with Madhubani art. Madhubani paintings were done to celebrate wedding of Lord Rama and Sita. I would now like to call upon Ms. Vanaja Banagri to felicitate our author, Ms. Shobha Tharoor Srinivasan. Vanaja ji is established voice in contemporary Indian literature, former editor for Hyderabad Times. She has authored several bestsellers in genre of fiction and non-fiction in 10 consecutive weeks. She has written 6 books